Well, this is Dr. Lemmon, and this is my talk for May. Um, in this space, I've been just chatting about concepts this year, and it's kind of an association with the blog. The blog is moving through a training process, so to speak, with some goals in mind. So some of the questions I've got and some of the input I've got from people out there, from emails, thank you very much, and other comments is I have taught a multitude of things, like all of a sudden, what have I changed my mind or something different going on? It's a little confusing, I guess, for people that have taken some type of spiritual training or some type of classes, and they say, is that still appropriate or what's going on? So let me go to a bigger picture, because that's the whole idea for having these talks, is to throw out a bigger picture. I think when I first started to look at human development during early childhood days, pre-age 6, a child comes into form, and what we do know from psychology is that they start to form defensive patterns that are totally unconscious patterns. They just simply a movement patterns to react to the environment, to temperature changes, et cetera, et cetera. Where you've been around children, I imagine all of you have to somehow, some are parents, they start to write, if things the child cannot figure out what to do to get comfortable in that moment, they just kind of scream out. So there's a dependence on the caretaker, most certainly. But the child has, since they don't communicate, they just simply move, locate themselves, move around a little bit. And so in the beginning, it's just movement, and those get secured. So we call them defensive patterns. It's like any new environment you get into, you right away look around. Do you need a defense? Do you need a wall? Do you need a protection around you? Do you need a fence? Do you need a what do you need to defend yourself, to secure yourself, right? No matter where you're at. And so those are first lines of thinking. So the initial training that you get is really coming into that are very, very quick, very responsive, automatically programmed defensive pieces. So you can duck, move, and whatever. And those are with us all our life. Okay. So they're good news and sometimes bad news. They create sometimes reactions that we get upset or violent or mad about something because it's a defensive move and we didn't hear it right or we weren't paying enough attention. So they can be a problem, but also they're very essential. So and that's the nature of human life. We tend to swing like a pendulum from one extreme to the other. So by the time we're coming into form and we each reach the age of reasoning, in other words, we can start to identify an idea of self, and we can start to relate. It's maybe around age 6. We then start to get into a different stage of development. From that stage, we get into what we should have an interactive play space. We should be around other kids. We should have interaction. When we learn to manage those unconscious defense moves is in that play space, that first series of play space from 6 all the way through maybe 2nd grade. And so we start to recognize it's like, oh, there's not really a threat here. So you can learn to manage and override those unconscious commands. Someone might push you in a playground and you have a reaction at first. Whether your reaction is anger or fear, you have a reaction automatically comes up. And then you take a breath and you say, oh, they're just bumped into me. They were just not paying attention. I don't have to get frustrated. I don't have to get frightened. Now, I know I'm putting that into language, but all of this occurs way, way below the idea of language set. It just starts to reprogram this system. So it's a very important learning curve that comes into play. We have an issue today because kids are being brought up not in groups with other kids, not out in parks, but they're being brought up in a different type of environment. They've been brought up in front of a television. They've been brought up in front of electronics. So there's no interaction. So that's why today we have all the emotional problems we have with children, high suicide rates, etc. As they never learn how to turn those defense systems off. I don't know what that's going into a direction. I don't know if that's a positive thing that we're looking at as we start to become global people. Maybe this will all work out. I have no idea. We just, one person doesn't live long enough to see a complete package of evolution changes. It would be 200, 300, 400 years. So we never get to see the real big picture. We just get to see the fragments and the changes. So I'm not making this a critique or saying there's a problem. Personally, myself, I have kids. I raised the kids. I've never owned a television in my life. I don't own a television right now. I have a computer, obviously, because I'm talking into a screen on one. But my preference would be to talk to a group of people because I like that interaction. And I think that we all learn from those interactions in various different levels and different stages. So that's kind of what I'm touching on. So that first development level as a child is learning to manage that automatic system. And so we're not always at a reaction to some unconscious automatic system that goes off and either makes us aggressive or makes us anxious or makes us depressed or any one of those therapeutic things that the psychologists chit chat about that is increasing in number constantly. The second most important thing is we get into a play space when we get a little bit older, pre-teens, all through early teens. And that is a place where we start to learn not only safety and risk, the idea of how much risk can I take before I fire off my safety mechanism, but there we start to get social interactions. What do we do with someone that don't agree with you? What do we do with someone who is just more physical than you do? What if you do with someone that's just louder, right? I speak loud, and so in my environment, I'm used to making a lot of noise. I have friends that are very quiet people. They don't ever raise their voice. So if all of a sudden I'm in and I'm talking about something, you see, and it's not a question of punishment or something. There are people that are fairly quiet, but maybe the guys all watch sports or some silly thing like that, and they get all excited and they get loud about things like that. Those are normal curves where all of a sudden a child can learn. Now a young teen can learn, like, how much play do I have? How big a package can I get? When is this exuberance of energy coming forth? When is it too much? When is it acceptable? What is the volume level? What is interactive? How much can I touch people? How much should I not touch people? How close can I get to someone? It's different in every culture. There's a saying I know you all heard, but I have seen from different countries I've been, people in some countries like to get really close. In Arab countries, they say when they're talking to someone, they like to feel the breath on their face. So they're really, really close. Asian countries, they're very close. I have traveled a lot. I've never really had a problem with any of those, but it's a funny feeling when someone gets up within a couple inches of your face and they're talking to you, or you ask someone for directions or ask them to translate something and they just get right over. And it's like, whoa, you almost want to back up a little bit. And so it takes some conditioning when you're a traveler to be able to take a breath and say, oh, there's a learning curve. You're going to be a lot closer than what I'm used to in America, but that's okay. We learn those. They're different countries, different cultures. They're all different. And so what we're brought up into, we have to learn that standard. If we don't learn that standard, we then make an assumption that all of a sudden fires off those automatic programs, and then we're either threatened or we're angry or we're scared or we're anxious or we're depressed or we feel like we failed, et cetera, et cetera. those are assumptions that we automatically make if we don't have that interactive piece. It needs to be a human interactive piece, right? It's really tough if there's not a human in it. And this piece probably is the one that we're dealing with the most critically right now in our society, is that learning curve. If you get past all those and survive that to some degree, you start to learn in the latter part of the teens and going into the 20s, you start to learn what are the limits, what are the interactions, how far can you push one person versus another. You actually start to store all that, and you start to build conscious patterns and unconscious subconscious patterns, we call it, because they have a story index in them. They have some details in them. So you look at someone and you watch their eye contact, to watch the way they talk, to watch how they look at you, they watch how close, how far away they got, all of that, and starts to be up here into a subconscious, which means that it's not unconscious. You can actually get into it, and there'll be a story in there, an experience that is like. So when you look at someone, you said, "Oh, that's like my friend Bob." My friend Bob used to get real loud when everybody was cutting him off because he always wanted to be heard. Okay, well, then it's not a threat. It's a trait in a personality. And you start to develop knowledge of those traits. It's a really very important lessons. It really requires human interaction. So when we start to look at a spiritual process, what I'm going to generally call a spiritual process, once upon a time, it might have been just simply joining a church. That might have been a spiritual process. So a church pretty much was set up. There was a lot of interaction with people. You go to a lecture, a talk, a service, an event. If it's tribal, then it could very well be some type of a ritual that you get involved in. It's an interactive human process. That is really very important. It's not a video like you're looking at right now. It's really a person. And so you're looking at these pieces that are start to come together, and they start to produce this like, oh, this is how that person shows up and finds value in the world. And over here, this is how this person shows up and finds value. This person thinks certain things are important. I don't agree with them, but I can understand what's going on. If I don't have this interaction, I would not know what's causing it. We get all this data because it's not just simply our eyes feeding in. It comes from contact. It comes from all your sensory perception. All the senses are in there, involved in it. So the spiritual piece, the spiritual development is like you start to understand everybody acts a little differently. Everybody has different. You could say, here's my club, we all act the same. Well, if you do that, then you're isolating yourself, and you're just simply saying, I'm going to hang out with everybody that acts like me. So you don't learn anything. So then you expand that out and you interact with different people, and that gives you more diversity. The more diversity starts to provide an opportunity. I would say that a spiritual journey would probably be, I would recommend, pretty much a 10-year investment. It's kind of scary to think that you'd start taking classes and get involved. But if you look at the human package, that's pretty much, I'm just saying, you get out of college, you get into some type of group. Maybe it's a club organization for a while. Maybe you stay in one club or one hobby for a while, and then you move on to something else. I have done all those things. When the sport I took in college was fencing. I got out of college and that was pretty much forget fencing. I've been a diver and was in with groups of diving. I have taught martial arts and did karate classes. I have done a lot of hiking in the woods. I've done some rock climbing, not very good at it. uh, I've done a lot of different things. All those are groups of people I hung out with for a while. And then I moved on to another group of people I hung out with for a while. I would call that a spiritual journey. When you start to see the way possibilities show up in other people, you start to get the idea that there are other possibilities available to you. It's not like we had a menu presented to us, or it's not like mom all of a sudden or dad or whoever gave you your name and laid out a cultural package for you that was the rules for life, you can make changes. You can develop. And so a whole spiritual process means that you get into looking at how other people have developed different than you. That opens a range up for you to be able to, if you can relate to them, tolerate them, deal with them, and even have a consideration. I have some people that come over to my house for dinner and they just sit there for an hour and a half and talk about their life and themselves. And you can't ever shut them up. It's just like nonstop. And so the background is drifting. It's it's a deception. And so, and then you get other people that come over and they just ask questions. And it's just like, and then other people come over and are interactive. They ask about adventures, they tell you stories, they share back and forth. So finding a balance is what you're trying to learn. You're trying to learn all these skill sets of what it's going to take in the world to make all that happen. And it's a good thing I didn't wear a green shirt. I'd blend into the background. All right. So those are learning pieces. Once you get through that learning pieces, you start to notice all this difference going on, you can start to realize what is available to me. So this is where spiritual practice starts to get into structure. What do I do differently that I can learn what's potentially there? To do that, you have to start to build a relationship with phenomena. Phenomena is anything that occurs that doesn't necessarily meet the logical criterion. It's like something really different. That doesn't have to be ghost in a closet. It doesn't have to be strange, weird spaceships, aliens flying around. It could just be some oddity. It's just that you notice something. You'll notice something, you think, oh, that's kind of weird. I just saw someone, I thought I recognized them. And now that I see them walking, it's not who I thought it was. Or you see someone and they recognize you, and you look at them and it takes a little while for you to recognize them. Like, wow, your mind was in a different place. The way you were relating to life was a different place. You always saw them from one perspective of you. You have another perspective of who you are. Like, oh my goodness, wow, I know this person. I didn't recognize them. Wow, that's really kind of interesting. That's a phenomena, right? These are all legitimate things. It doesn't have to be big things. It doesn't have to be voices in the night. But if you have voices in the night, you have dreams. It's like all the above, right? All those are phenomena. You start to look at them. You don't think you're crazy, and you don't think they're logical or truth. Truth in our world means it's a product of some logical structure. That's the definition of truth in our world. But there's a lot of things going on. But we live in a universe where we know really very little about it. We know a lot about a small piece. We know a lot about 5% of it. So 95% of it we don't know very much about. So it's pretty much that same thing. We may know a lot about certain things, but there's an awful lot more that's totally unknown. So our interface for that is already not defined. It's not defined. It doesn't mean it's not there. It's not defined, so it's not a logical truth, but it's something that happened. If you try to make it a story, because we process the stories, you try to make it a story, you reduce it to something less than, and you miss all opportunity. You make it something that you miss the opportunity to learn anything from it. So you have to sit with it. You get an inkling, you get an idea, you get an inspiration, you have to sit with it. You have to see, wow, what does that mean? You have to take some notes. This is a bigger process. So this is a process, first off, you go through a spiritual awakening, kind of at the end of this spiritual interactive piece, which is just a human person interaction, learning the boundaries of how you defined you. You think that you defined you and that's normal, and everybody does the same thing. You have to learn it is not normal, and not nobody does everything the same way. It becomes very, very different. So you get to play into that arena. And once you understand that and understand how that works, then you can start to look at yourself and say, what would be available to me? What could I do differently? I have been in a lot of different professions. I've done a lot of different things. I've taught a lot of different programs. So when I talk about advanced class, I don't mean that they have the answer to everything. It just means that they're now working on their own potential. How could I take something that I don't know anything about? I just have this feeling in my head, or I just have this desire for something, or I just like I'm fascinated by something. Can I do something with it? Well, you have to interact with it a little bit. You have to play with it. You have to sit with it. You have to take some notes. It's a little bit longer process. Uh, what does that goal look like? And where does it, can we bring this all together, this whole growth piece? Well, I think so, because when you start out in the beginning, those unconscious programs are automatic reactions. The subconscious programs that have a little bit of stories pieced in it and then still have some unconscious pieces in it are also just reactions. The average person in the world says, well, I made a decision. They didn't really make a decision. They probably either had a reaction, which was pretty fast, or they narrowed all their options down to two. And then the two were ones that were familiar to them. And once they narrowed it down to two that were familiar, they then just took from past information and said, well, of these two, this one worked better for me, so I'm going to do that. Now, that's not really decision making. That is kind of, but it's more reaction. It's on the cusp of reaction to decision making. What if you have a whole plethora of information in front of you and you don't know anything about any of it? And you just sit there and you don't say what is right, what's wrong. You say, okay, what do I want to try first? I'm going to play with this and see where this goes. I'm going to have fun with this. I'm going to see what occurs. So now you're into what I call advanced work. Advanced work is not like, I don't know. People come over and say, why did I get sick? Do you think it's because so-and-so was mad at me? Do you think I got whacked by someone? Do you think I was hanging out with someone who was sick? Do you think I picked it up from that person on the bus with me? Gosh, are those all possibilities? Absolutely all possibilities. Does it have to be that way? Well, no, it doesn't have to be that way if you can make a decision. Do you get this? It's like, uh, so where do you want to go? Where do you need to be to be able to step into that next potential, the next revealing of who you are becoming? You don't have to do that. You could get defensive, but defensive is all redundant pieces. Think about this for a second. It's all redundant pieces. So if your life is all redundant pieces, always safe, always pulling back, always redundant pieces, it's redundant. That means habitual, habitual, habitual. Habitual pattern drive leads to what we generally call addiction. When I say addiction, I don't necessarily mean drug addiction or booze addiction. I mean any type of addiction behavior pattern. So when I'm talking in these talks about addictive patterns of redundancy, I'm talking about the redundancy. Most of us, what we do is redundancy, right? It's even our week is 7 days. We got blah, 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 blah. I mean, I got phone calls I make on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursday. I've got somewhere probably a list of who I'm supposed to get hold of. I've got jobs to do. I just got done washing the house because I do that in April. I just got done with, I'm working right now on the last zone, that's area irrigation area on the yard outside for the yard work, getting ready for May, because I'm going to May, June, and July, I'm going to do a little traveling. So I'm trying to get everything set up so that maintenance level, it's all done. You start to see those are all redundant pieces. They're all just pattern pieces, right? Um, and so life is mostly redundant unless you can reach out, interact with something that's not known, that's not redundant, that's not reliable, that's got a little bit of risk, which you learned back when you were 6, 7, 8 years old, how to handle a little bit of risk and when to go running to mom and what you could take, what you could accept. Could you pick up a worm and look at it, or did you just scream and holler, or what did you do? And if you just scream and you were frightened, someone took it out and picked the worm up and said, it won't bite you. You can kind of hold it. You can see what happens. Those are all learning curves that it seems really silly, but that's how the database builds. It doesn't, we don't store a situation like we would take a picture on a vacation and that's like, there's the picture. No, we actually then modify everything. We add to, we amend to. We don't store all the data. We actually shorthand the whole thing. We just got bits and pieces, and then we amend pieces to them. We adapt things. We shuffle things around. We can then use that to enrich a new situation, or we could just stay in redundancy and never step out. If we stay in redundancy, we're headed for addiction. So addiction lots of times shows up as a problem: drug addiction, sex addiction, alcohol addiction, TV addiction, video game addiction. There is tons of titles of addiction. They're constantly redefining the textbook on addiction to be able to say, as we move into this. But if we look at real big picture over thousands of years, we can see that it goes in cycles. It goes into cycles in time where we become more dislocated, more separated from people. We just went through an experience of an epidemic. Post-epidemics, this is something that occurs. People separate out more. And so we start to lay into more addiction pieces. An awful lot of people maybe used to go to the movies, and now when you go to the movies, you don't see as many people. They were pretty closed for a while. All those things are they going to come back? Is all that going to adapt, or is it all going to change? Most of it's going to change. That's just the way it's going to be. I don't know where it's going to go, right? When you start to look at increases in suicide rate, you realize that we're probably not heading in a really good direction, but it doesn't mean that it won't adjust. So the idea of having these talks and having these is to get you to think a little bit. It's not about solving the world problems. It's about solving your problem. I'm working all the time on solving my problem. I'm most certainly not perfect. I'm a big risk taker. I like to do things. I like to most certainly pack my stuff together and I'm going on a trip for 2 months. Not a problem in a foreign country. Right up my alley, right? No problem. It doesn't intimidate me, but I have traveled with groups of people, and and I've seen people just totally get intimidated or totally get scared or totally get. My wife and I went on one trip, and there was a lady when we got on the trip. We had a little introductory talk, and there was about 12 of us, and her personality was such that in the morning she'd be there at breakfast. She would then start out the day. Before noon, she would be getting a taxi and going back to the hotel. And we'd see her the next morning. And I had asked her if she had a health challenge, and she said something about missing her dog. Like, whoa. So here you paid to go on a trip. It's an adventure trip, so it's only 10, 12 people. We're going to do all kinds of crazy adventure, hike up hills, all kinds of stuff. And here she's on this trip, but she can't make it. But 3 hours a day, wow, for a whole week. Wow, it was kind of intriguing. So at the end of the trip, I talked to her and she said, you really attack people. You've attacked me several times. Wow. So I'm thinking, oh, okay. I said, well, I tried to swear off being a serial killer, but I guess it's still in me somewhere, you know, and you meet the pattern of the type of person I would kill, but I'm not doing that anymore. So you can feel okay. And I just walk away. Like, where's her reference of a serial killer? I'm threatening because I asked if she's okay. I'm asking, why does she leave early? Why? I'm trying to communicate with a person. Do you understand? Yes. Did I lie? Did I deceive her? Did I become a greater threat? Yeah. And we got to upset the apple cart some way, shape, or form. What is she running around of? But does she ever leave her house? I have had clients call me and say, I have not left my house for 7 years. Like, wow. I would like to take some classes. Can you come teach me to me in my house? I said, the classes aren't information. The classes are interaction. Information guides you to be able to define interaction, not by what's right or what's wrong, but by what is different and why it's different. That's what it's all about. That's what learning, that's what the human game's about. And like, wow, that's interesting. So I said, no, I can't come to your house and fix you. I can't come to your house and teach you something. But I could bring a group of 5 people to your house and we could sit down and do some exercises and I will do that for you. And you just call me back and let me know when you're ready. Yeah, 99.5% of the time I never get another call back because that's way too intimidating. Too many people at once. Do you see how this range plays out? I'm sure if you listen to this video, you're not at that extreme. You're somewhere just trying to figure it all out. When we try to figure it all out, because our brain and our thinking system is logical, we're trying to figure it all into what is wrong, what is broken. Should I take a certain supplement? Should I do this? Should I go to the gym and work out for a couple months and then get exhausted and decide I don't want to do that anymore, or work out for a week and get so sore? It's like this is we try to find a fix and a 10-second fix. I'm just saying the reason we're on this planet for more than 10 seconds is because it takes more than 10 seconds to figure out the game and what you can do with it and how you can access a potential, how you can support the changes as it evolves, as it becomes greater. If we wanted to go back to the way it was, we would probably have to kill half the people on the planet just because we have too many people. You know, 100 years ago, we didn't have 50% of the people living in a city somewhere. When you go to a city like Istanbul with 15 million people living in it, you go to China and they've got 4, 5, 6, 7 million people in a city. You know, wandering around in that type of environment, you start to realize it's like, wow, I have to think different. I mean, I say I live in a country. It's really a city, but it's, it's maybe 50, 60,000 and it's spread out quite a bit. So I don't have a whole lot of, I can jump on a freeway and be at an airport in 7 minutes, but for the most part, I don't have a lot of traffic. I don't have cars going up and down my street. I don't have trucks. I don't have airplanes flying over my house. So it feels like I'm out in the country. And so I could get more out in the country, but then it's cumbersome to be able to travel. It's also cumbersome to be able to go interact. I like to go to the movies maybe once in a while. I like to go out to dinner maybe once, twice a month. I like to meet up with friends. I like to go do things. Like maybe we'll go bowling sometime. Maybe we'll go to some events sometime. So I don't want to be living on a mountaintop. So I'm not that detached from life. That's not a spiritual journey. That's an escape. I want to be able to interact, but I don't want to be a victim to the interaction. I want to be able to come into it, learn from it, and come back to it, find a resource and play with it, engage with it. And that's how you develop, engaging with. So I put together, which is going to be like a 4-year protocol and what I would normally call an advanced class. I had advanced classes that I taught when I started getting into emotional reactions and emotional changes, why the numbers started decreasing tremendously because it was intimidating to be able to show up with an emotion. Can you show up? I used to have people sit down and said, I want you to don't hurt anybody, but I want you to pretend you're mad at them. Tell them off. Tell them what a sleazebag they are. Just tell them off completely. And then do it for 3 minutes and then sit down, shut up, and notice how long it takes to come back to neutral ground and see what effect that anger does on you. Because you're not mad at the person, you're play acting. Can you manage this? This is a game we're acting on to get to something. I'm not sure what, because it's unknown. So let's just engage. Let's play on it. It's been around for a long time. It's evolving. It's changing. The pieces are getting smaller. The interactions can getting greater. We really have more resources available to us if we utilize them and if we play with them. So that's kind of the mainstream of my philosophy of looking at this. I put programs together. I like to shake the cage. I'm a risk taker, so I shake the cage. You know, I see a kid with braces and I say, "Oh my goodness, you can't get on an airplane, can you?" And they're looking at me like, "Huh?" I said, "With that metal in your mouth, they won't let you on an airplane." And they laugh at me. If I, oh, well, they let me on the airplane. They can see I got braces, It's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that, And so these interactions open up people. Always giving chicken soup to people doesn't make for diversity in the world. You really have to not insult them, but wake them up. Wake them up. Talk to them a little bit. Say, wow. I can remember when I was a kid, I was headed to the park. So it was summertime. And and I'm blonde hair, light complected. I couldn't be out in the sun very much because got sunburnt easily. So I usually had long sleeve of some sort on, maybe a long sleeve t-shirt on so that I could tolerate some sun. I had a hat that I was supposed to wear. Most of the time I didn't wear it, which is creates some precancer conditions on my head now, my old age. But I was just headed to the park, imagining that I was going to do something, like a kid would do. I was early teens, maybe 13, 14. And there was an old man sitting on a bench at a bus bench. It was a Sunday. And I saw that there and I think, wow, buses don't run on Sunday. I wonder if he knows that. So I sat down next to him and I was just kind of sitting there staring out like he was. And then finally he said, today's Sunday. And he said, yeah. And I said, are you waiting for a bus? And he goes, no, not really. I said, well, that's good because Sunday and you don't run. And he said, yeah, I know. And he said, what are you up to? And I said, I was going to go play at the park. And he said, it's great that you can go play. When I was your age, I'm British. So I had to go in the Navy. I'm thinking the Navy. He said, yeah, we were on sailing ships with wood decks. So we were barefoot. We had shoes, but we could only wear them off the boat. I sat there for an hour and he's telling me stories about, here he is, like my age or older, telling me stories about when he was 13 or 14 and had to go spend a couple of years in the Navy in Britain on a sailing ship. Wow. Great stories. Like, oh my goodness. I finally got up and left and got over to the park and kids were playing. I'm sitting there thinking, like, I don't know what to do with all this. Like, I got this huge story that's like unbelievable. It, it's a phenomenon because it's not the way our world works today. He's telling me yesterday's story. What tomorrow's story is going to be people on spaceships somewhere. The Navy is going to be totally something different. It's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Could I sit down and share this story with someone? I don't know if anybody would want to hear it. Like, wow. But I sat there and listened to it for half hour, 45 minutes. So I have to change. I have to actually reduce the width of this package so I can just go play on the gym equipment and stuff at the park and hang out with my friends or whoever they are and talk and do silly stuff and then I get home and by the time I get home I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, I could share this story with my family over dinner, but I don't think they want to hear this. Matter of fact, I'm not sure that I know anybody that wants to hear this. Like, wow, having a bigger package, more information is intimidating. It's totally useless because it doesn't fit in a logical world. You understand the potential and the possibility for you is not logical yet. It's a phenomenon. It doesn't fit in our world yet. You're the potential to bring it in. So how can you share that with someone? It's really tough. You got to really develop a relationship with it. You got to sit with it for a while. You got to say, what can I do with this? You got to ask a lot of questions. You got to allow that to get to a point where you can really make a decision. I have 5 options. I'll just pick this one. What the heck? Because I don't know anything about any of the 5. I don't have a preference. I don't have an automatic program running it. I have now reached autonomy. Oh, wow. At the end point of a spiritual journey, you reach autonomy. How interesting, right? Okay, so I promised to be short-winded on some of these. I probably promised to be short-winded on all of them, but that's deception. So I'm gonna cut it. But if you have any questions, why you're welcome to email me at chris@wizardscatch.com, and I'd be glad to answer your questions. I made a lot of friends, probably a few enemies, but I made a lot of friends. I don't hear from the enemies. I hear from the friends, and that's nice. But if the enemies want to contact me and ask me a question, I'm good with that too. It makes no difference. And so I want to thank you very much for your time. And so look forward to talking to you next month.